Hey folks, I'm making a video about the strengths and advantages of Age of Sigmar. This is a positive video, it doesn't include any criticisms about why I think Age of Sigmar is a step in the right direction for Games Workshop and for the hobbyists. And it's mostly compiled of things that I've noticed, reading and gaming, and the comments that other people have made in their videos as well. So first and foremost, the rules are free, and the War Scrolls are free. They're available on the Games Workshop website. That's fantastic. More of that by Games Workshop is always appreciated. It really, as we all know, it allows anyone with 8th edition armies to immediately play without any cost. They can just go ahead and try it out. And I think that's a positive move. Age of Sigmar is very scalable. You can play as small or as large a game as you want. 8th edition was a little bit more limited in that regard. Certainly not in large games, but in smaller games it was. The lower model count of Age of Sigmar, I would say, makes the game cheaper. The barrier of entry is pretty much non-existent. You can buy one or two models, might be a box or two, or just one big monster and play a game. Might not be the best gaming experience, but it's something that a new player could build upon. And I like the fact that army size and deployment determines the length of the game. Age of Sigmar has a basic rule set, which is great for new players, but it still can be challenging. It still adds a lot of hidden complexity with war scrolls and special abilities. I like the fact that it's so basic that it will allow gamers to play the game in a variety of different ways. And Games Workshop really supports that. Um, if you want Army Comp rules, there are already a lot available on the internet. You can easily find them. But if you want to make your own house rules for measuring and shooting, absolutely go ahead. And a lot of you are already doing that. That's no problem at all. I like the fact that there's no turn limits, and that basically means that every combat is important. You're not going to get to turn 4 and realize that that little combat or skirmish on the flank was just utterly useless and won't contribute to the game. But I also think that the basic rules of Age of Sigmar has room to grow. And so if you look at the changes and additions, they often have gone from very complex to very basic. And it's when they go back to the basic rules over 2 or 3 editions, not only do they become increasingly more complex again, but it allows a large amount of new players to come into the hobby and kind of grow with the complexity as well. I like the fact that there's no point cost. For the simple reason that it makes codex creep obsolete. They can come out with crazy new models and war scrolls, but really, in many ways, the game is fairly balanced. All you have to do is add a few more models to your side, or take a few different options to counteract what your opponent will bring. The idea of having good or terrible units is really not part of Age of Sigmar. Obviously how a unit performs on the table can still be good or bad, but as part of army design, it's no longer really a component. I'm sure we've all had units where we would really like to use a particular monster, but it's really quite horrible in the game, or vice versa, where we don't really want to use that unit, but it's just too good not to. And I really think that lends itself. No points can lend itself to a variety of games where you want to be deliberately outnumbered, or missions and scenarios of that type, and I think that would be a good thing. So the War Scrolls in general, I think, are fantastic. They condense the rules make it very easy for new players just to have maybe a couple scrolls, and then as they grow their collection, it expands with an enormous amount of interaction and complexity. Combat, I would say, is a little bit easier to predict. Um, 8th edition was very easy to predict, but on a huge scale of a skirmish game, it can get a bit mind-boggling when you're throwing a ton of dice. But it's actually not that difficult to predict who's going to win a combat. I like that the War Scrolls have unique rules and special abilities for even characters. It really makes it useful to own a variety of different heroes. Whereas in the past, one hero can represent pretty much any weapon and magic item you want. In this, you actually need to buy the model because the model corresponds to the War Scroll. And I think that that's an interesting way to grow complexity in the game and encourage people to buy more models without a point value. So that's I find that really interesting. And from what I've seen of the new releases over the past couple weeks, the Stormcast Eternals, there's another unit released this weekend, and they all have far more weapon options than what was available in the past. And it's really, again, the weapon options seem to be what the encouragement to buy the box sets is really about. And I think that that's an interesting move by Games Workshop. And I like the interaction between the units and characters on the War Scrolls. It can get very complex. I like the fact that it's a skirmish game simply because the models can be more individualistic and heroic looking. It lends itself to conversions, not just of your heroes and monsters, but of your previous rank and file. And you can also probably use bits from different game systems that Games Workshop produces, and I think that's a very interesting way to promote people buying the units from other game systems to convert Age of Sigmar models, or vice versa. The formations, I think, is a very positive thing, simply because it, again, here's a way without a point cost to make you or provide reasons why you would want to use maybe units that you don't particularly would have used. It really makes armies that are a bit fluffy with a particular theme really useful and useful in the game. In the past, if you made a fluffy army, it probably wouldn't be that useful. It wouldn't be that competitive, but it can be now. And it encourages the broad range of models and units. It's not just going to be one or two really good units and then the exact same standard army design for the rest. You're going to see, I think, a lot more interchangeability and variety, and between armies. More scenarios, more missions. That's always a positive element, and there looks to be far more scenarios in Age of Sigmar than in 8th. And this is just something I kind of think about as a collector. It's just easier to collect if you only have the model count and you don't have a point system. Because point systems were always difficult to add up as if you wanted to see how many points of a particular army you have. It changes depending on how many magic items, magic banners you're taking. There's a fairly large range in which you could take a minimum point value and a maximum point value. And for me, I always averaged it, but it's easier just as a plain model count. This is going to be a bit competitive or controversial, but I think this game is fairly competitive, and it can be balanced. That's really up to you. I'll discuss this further in a future video, but I would honestly say that it really can be balanced and competitive. if you play it as balanced and competitive. You can obviously play it completely imbalanced and completely non-competitive, but it can be the opposite. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the game because it allows people that don't want to play competitively and want to play an imbalanced game because they're doing a narrative or just think it's fun to play that without penalty, and vice versa. The fact that GW created a brand new and very controversial product has meant that they're trying to reach out to the community. Um, and again, the more outreach, the more Games Workshop listens to the community, the better. So they've been answering questions, conducting interviews, they've made a pledge of support, as well as redesigning the headquarters. They've produced t-shirts and apparel, which is something that they've really done in very limited numbers in the past. And they've produced these apps in recent years or recent months. Age of Sigmar is brand new. They're free. They're really good. So I would honestly say Age of Sigmar is a step in the right direction. I think there's more positive gains than losses. I really liked 8th, but I think Age of Sigmar has a bright future ahead of it, um, especially if you're a collector, a casual gamer, or a hobbyist. The competitive players require a bit more of a transition. I used to be a competitive player, so I completely understand where they're coming from. But I do think, as I will explain in the video in a few days, that it can be competitive. Um, I would say the opinions of the game have changed. People used to think it was just a few weeks ago, used to think it was fairly basic, but they've changed. They think it's a pretty solid game the more that they play. That said, that's probably based upon the videos that I watch, because I know there's a lot of negative comments out there. So if there's something you really like about Age of Sigmar, but I didn't mention it, please make a comment below. Again, this video is about what I like about Age of Sigmar, not what if there's anything I'm not a big fan of, I don't really mention that or talk about it. But if you like the video and you want to see what might be coming in the next few weeks, please keep an eye on my channel. Keep watching and appreciate it. Thank you.